Savile went from national treasure to national disgrace overnight. The lurid stories of his sexual depravity surfaced from the murky depths of his 50-year reign over our televisions. Now seen as Britain's most notorious paedophile, the popular press described his actions as those of a monster. But was there a darker motivation for his crimes? Was Savile in fact a trans-dimensional sorcerer who harvested occult energies to feed his hunger for power? Let's look at the facts. James Wilson Vincent Savile was born on October the 31st in 1926.
Seventh son,
which in ancient folklore meant you were born with magical powers.
His co-workers suspected he was a witch. As a Bevin boy, Jimmy Savile's fellow miners thought Jimmy Savile was a witch.
Now then, nobody but nobody ever did 8 hours down a pit and came back as immaculate as the set-off with white shirt and everything like that. They were quite convinced that I was a witch. If you go to South Kirby now, you'll get some of the old miners when you say, Jimmy Savile's done well, hasn't he? Ah, and he'll look around and he'll say, he's not what you think you know. The forces of darkness are at work there.
He had influence over people from all walks of life.
Stray television crew, a dozen reporters, 1,000 autographs. He attracts attention like a Roman candle. Jimmy Savile feeds off people.
Jimmy Savile liked to mix with people from all walks of life, by day crisscrossing the country to meet the man on the street, and by night hobnobbing with the rich, famous and influential. Here are just a few of the people he knew or had associated with. The Beatles, Peter Sutcliffe, the Pope, Ephraim Katzir, Elvis, Esther Ranson, Margaret Thatcher, Ted Heath, Gary Glitter, Norman Tebbit.
I remember so well you at Stoke.
Diana Spencer, Prince Charles, Prince Philip, Frank Bruno, Alan Franey, and many, many, many police chiefs. Savile was also a Knight of Malta, a Knight Commander of St. Gregory, and a Knight of the Realm. Jimmy Savile seemed to know everybody, yet nobody seemed to know Jimmy Savile. Publicly, he played the part of court jester, but privately, he held an almost Jedi-like position of influence over the highest and lowest life forms of British society.
What I remember so well is taking him into the Palace of Westminster. I've taken many guests in over the years, but he's the only one who was simply waved through security.
He used occult signs and magical language.
In the occult world, language is an extremely powerful tool. Since ancient times, magic words have been used by magicians to cast spells and invoke spirits. Some are well known to us now, but others have remained obscured through the ages by the secret groups who still use them to this day. This is why we spell words.
Take a word like abracadabra.
Abracadabra is an incantation used as a magic word in stage magic tricks. The first known mention of the word was in the 3rd century AD in a book called Liber Medicinalis. During the Great Plague, Londoners were said to have posted the word on their doorways to ward off sickness. Aleister Crowley, the infamous magician, regarded it as possessing great power. He said its true form is abrahadabra. So even a seemingly harmless word can have a more deep and esoteric meaning, and a much more powerful and potentially harmful effect than presumed.
It all depends on the intention.
When words are repeated 3 times, it is said to increase the effectiveness of the phrase. This is an ancient belief known to us as the rule of 3. Its use is largely unconscious. We prefer things in threes. It suggests wholeness or completeness, and although it features heavily in many religious texts, it is also encoded into our modern myths.
There's no place like home.
No, no, no.
Now, put down the charm.
Education, education, and education. Words.
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 There's no place like home. There's no place like
Now then.
Now then.
Now then.
Now then.
Now then, now then, now then.
Now then. Now then. Now then.
Now then.
Now then.
Now then.
Now then. Now then.
Did Savile use this phrase to create a specific mind state in his audience? By repeating the words now and then 3 times, was he attempting to penetrate deep into a subconscious level of the psyche? And was he deliberately using 2 opposing words, now and then, to further confuse and mesmerise? Once under his spell, the nation was powerless to the persuasive nature of the magician who could manipulate perception of reality for his own gratification.
You could say he groomed a nation.
Jimmy Savile loved the limelight and crowds loved him.
Jimmy was a wonderful man. His public face is well known, but we knew him much more as an uncle. He was a very good friend.
He was a very special man. You've got to go a million, billion miles to find another man like him, you know what I mean? A class amongst himself.
But I have a magic chair that does all sorts of things. 1, 2, 3, hey presto. Hospitals have rules with patients and things like that. Well, because I'm dyslexic when I want to be, I don't understand rules.
This is Jimmy Savile's former home in Glencoe, Scotland, which was vandalised after the recent deplorable revelations about his life. Notice they call him the Beast. Aleister Crowley was a notorious English occultist wizard and founder of Thelemic philosophy, which was summarised by the rule, "Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law." He was also known as the Great Beast 666. The popular press of the day dubbed him the wickedest man in the world.
Sound familiar?
He knew everybody, you know, he toured up with the Rolling Stones, he toured with the Beatles, 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 the Beatles.
It has been well noted elsewhere that many bands from the 1960s were influenced by Aleister Crowley and Thelema, including the Beatles. Here, on the cover of Hell, we see the Beatles performing the signs of the grades of Aleister Crowley's religion, A star, A star. It was 20 years ago today. The opening line to the track Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band is said to be a reference to the anniversary of Crowley's death 20 years previously. Here's Crowley on the cover, positioned second in line to the Vedic yogi Sri Yukteswar Giri. The Mano Cornuto, or horned hand, is the hand sign symbolising the pagan horned god. Here are the Beatles on a photo shoot for the Yellow Submarine album. Notice that Paul is doing the OK sign and John is doing the mano cornuto. In this image, John decides to stick with his horned hand gesture, while Paul switches his OKs to an owl face.
We'll start straight off with a letter from Winslow in Cheshire.
Jimmy Savile knew the Beatles well. In the early days, he booked the Beatles when he was a club promoter. He then went on to tour with the Fab Four at the height of their fame, where he acted as compere and master of ceremonies. In the 1960s, Jimmy Savile and the Beatles were the British pop industry. Both helped to usher in a new era of music, Savile as DJ and Top of the Pops presenter, and the Beatles who spearheaded the British invasion of America. If it is quite obvious the Beatles were influenced by the occult and the magician Crowley, is it too outrageous to suggest that Savile could have also been?
God is the fabric of everybody's life, and God is the fabric of my life. No more religious or less religious than anybody else. So I would not say that I'm a religious man, but I do know who the boss is. Or anywhere, God is all over, not necessarily up there.
If the good Lord, when he was doing his thing, if he bothered about people not seeing eye to eye with him, he would have got nowhere, and a lot of us would have got nowhere into the bargain. So therefore, you've got to square your shoulders and you've got to stand up to be counted, and you haven't really got to pay too much attention to whether people think that you're not doing the right thing. As long as your conscience is clear, then you're okay.
It should be noted that membership to a secret society in no way prevents one from entering into other secret societies. Here's our old maker's friend, Aleister Crowley, wearing the garb of two other occult groups, the mystical OTO, of which he was the head, and the Masons. Here we see the Masonic gesture for a select master Mason, the second highest known grade of this group. And here's Jimmy Savile performing the same secret gesture to those whom it concerned. By now, everybody must be aware of the use of secret handshakes in Masonic groups. Here is Savile overseeing the introduction of Frank Bruno to Peter Sutcliffe, the man prosecuted for the Yorkshire Ripper murders. Here is Crowley emulating the Osiris Slain pose, just like the Beatles on Help. And here's Savile doing the same. The Beatles famously once said they were more popular than Jesus.
But Jimmy Savile achieved lasting success. Was he somehow more important than the Beatles?
He was in charge. If he were here now, he'd be taking front stage.
Yeah,
I mean, when he was there, it was right now, Uncle Jimmy has arrived, you see, and everyone else took a back seat, and we knew that. I mean, when we did that last Top of the Pops, we all thought this is a moment, because at a defining moment, he'd done the first one, and when he turned up, we thought, the governor's here now, the gaffer's here, so you'll take a step back. Uncle Jimmy is here, jingle jangle, you see, I am in charge. And he was, and he put the light off at the end, very poignant moment.
Jimmy Savile feeds off people.
Jimmy Savile was buried at a 45-degree angle, overlooking the same stretch of sea where Dracula's ship, the Demeter, washed up. Both Count Dracula and Sir James Savile were energy vampires who stalked and terrorised England, preying on young virgins. Savile's golden coffin was cast in concrete. Was this to make sure that the vampiric energy beast of the north could never rise again? Was Savile's exposure part of the great cleansing that is currently underway across the world, which Danny Boyle helped to activate with the 2012 London Olympics opening ceremony? As it was during this time the ancient Egyptian Lion's Gate,
an energy transfer portal from the Sirius star system, was opened to help facilitate the recalibration of theoretical spiritual energies that flow throughout the universe.
Here we see the character of the child catcher, terrifying children in their NHS hospital beds. Jimmy Savile has since been accused of abusing dying children in Great Ormond Street Hospital, the same hospital seen in the opening ceremony. We also see Savile in the character of Voldemort, who appeared alongside the child catcher in the Olympic mega ritual. Voldemort, the Dark Wizard, is dressed in the black robes that symbolise Saturn, the pagan Roman god. Let's take a look at Saturn.
Was Jimmy Savile Saturn?
In ancient times, the sun was seen as an invincible god who died and was perpetually reborn. But on the outer edge of our solar system, Saturn was the real king. Known as Kronos, he represented time and law. He was the agricultural god who governed the seasons. He was the Egyptian Set, and he is Old Father Time.
He is Satan, the devil of new religions.
He's the Grim Reaper, Darth Vader, and Pan. Saturn's day is the last day of the week, the Sabbath, meaning worship of the planet Saturn.
Saturn is symbolised by the colour black and the black cube. It is also the hexagon, which is a two-dimensional representation of a cube in 3 dimensions.
In mythology, Saturn devoured his young and was also the Grim Reaper who, scythe in hand, took the sick and dying onto the underworld. The ancients worshipped him with ritual feasts involving all kinds of sexual debauchery.
Saturn was a lot like Jimmy Savile, and the similarities don't end with their hunger for children and guardianship of the dying. Saturn is also known as Lord of the Rings, or in Latin, Dominus Analorum. And what else was Jimmy Savile but the Lord of the Rings? Here is Savile's trademark hexagon ring. The first ritual in Aleister Crowley's Rites of Eleusis is the Rite of Saturn. Crowley believes sexual depravity led to illumination. It was an essential part of the occult rituals he taught worldwide. Was Jimmy Savile some kind of energetic reincarnation or an archetypal personification of the god Saturn? And did certain people knowingly worship him as such? In all his years in the music industry, why do we never see Savile flashing the Mano Cornuto? Was the Mano Cornuto introduced into pop music as a tribute to its creator, the horned god Saturn, Lord of the Rings, and devourer of the young? One national newspaper reported that Savile had been involved in satanic rituals in the basement of Stoke Mandeville Hospital. The participants were masked, a requirement during A-star rituals, and chanted Ave Satanas, which means Hail Satan, at the cloaked master of ceremonies, the unmistakable Jimmy Savile. But what if the chant was instead Ave Saturnas, or Hail Saturn? Ritual satanic abuse might be a fiction, it might not. But what would be so unusual about Saturn worshipping cults? The Egyptians, Greeks and Romans had them. Why not Jimmy Savile?
You know what I mean? He was a very special man. You've got to go a billion miles to find another man like him, you know what I mean? A class amongst himself.
But it's Jimmy Savile's association with the crown that is most intriguing, in every sense of the word. He appeared to have a free pass to Buckingham Palace and maintained a close friendship with 2 generations of the royal family.
Did you know Duke of Edinburgh's nickname is for me? Oz. Oz? Ostentatious. Oz. I don't know where he gets it from.
Prince Charles once wrote to Jimmy Savile with a gift of cigars, saying,
"Nobody will ever know what you have done for this country, Jimmy."
Surely he couldn't have been talking about Savile's charity work. Everyone knew about that anyway. And Jimmy was always known as a fix-it. He would dart here and there, making connections like a sewing machine needle, as he said. His back-story for what he was doing during the war is inconsistent. He perpetuated a myth of his early life. Sometimes he was in the RAF, sometimes down a mine, and sometimes he was laid up in a hospital bed. If he was some kind of spy or fixer, secretly trained during the war, then his backstory would have to be a myth.
All that we can prove is he was knighted 3 times and received an honorary Green Beret, one of only 3 given out, the other 2 recipients being Prince Philip and Prince Charles.
The connection between the occult and the secret services is well known and goes back to the very roots of modern espionage. In 2008, the researcher Richard B. Spence published a book claiming Crowley worked for British intelligence, and his involvement during World War II with naval intelligence officer and creator of James Bond, Ian Fleming, is historically documented. And what of the connection between secret services and royalty? The secret services worked for the crown, as they say,
for Queen and country.
The Elizabethan alchemist and white wizard, John Dee, worked directly for Queen Elizabeth as her personal astrologer and overseas agent. He signed his letters to the Queen, 007. Even further back in time we find Merlin acting as a personal wizard and advisor to King Arthur. Mythology or not, the theme of royalty keeping a court wizard is well documented.
Magic is said to exist in two forms, black and white. Traditionally, black is seen as self-serving and destructive, whilst white is restorative and altruistic. The division is only blurred by the intention of a spell or ritual.
Let me see your identification.
You don't need to see his identification.
We don't need to see his identification.
These aren't the droids you're looking for.
These aren't the droids we're looking for.
He can go about his business.
You can go about your business.
Move along.
Move along.
An adept magician can flit between the two seamlessly, knowing that the universe is about balance between these two energies.
Maybe Savile and Crowley were followers of a darker form of magic than Dee or Merlin, but it does not mean they didn't perform white or restorative magic too. Savile, it seems, worked tirelessly raising money for charity and fixing it for many children's dreams
and nightmares
to come true. Savile's charity endurance marathons were multi-purpose. They balanced his karma and raised bags of money for his many causes, which opened up doors to the sort of people his power could really help. Was Jimmy Savile gathering soul energy from the well-wishers and fans who unwittingly convened on the ancient ley lines that crisscross Britain? These lines are said to contain a constant flow of subtle earth force known as telluric energy.
Little is understood of this theory, and our own mention of it is only to bring it to the attention of researchers and inspire further investigation.
Jimmy Savile versus Internet.
Savile ruled the screen in The Magical Age of Television. He was the hypnotist in the corner of the living room, a wizard of the cult of celebrity, Uncle Jimmy, Mr. BBC. With his northern charm, he was everyman, and at the same time a fiercely individual eccentric who could eat fish and chips with the locals and have tea with the Queen in the same day.
You could say it took the work of many white wizards from around the globe and their collective magical fractal cone of power that is the internet to thwart the Dark Master Savile, who famously forbade himself from entering the realm of cyberspace. Savile had the popular press under a spell, but once it was broken and the reality-bending revelations of his sordid lifestyle were exposed, they briskly moved on. Whilst the BBC were busy deleting emails and shredding their archives, the online community continued their research, reporting and presenting further revelations about Jimmy Savile's life. We have gathered a lot of the information in this documentary using the internet, and give nothing but thanks to the many armies of diligent researchers online, such as those at the David Icke Forum. Whilst we don't agree with everything discussed, we respect the tenacity and courage in seeking to find answers to the questions we are left with in the aftermath of a national scandal that goes to the core of society.
We are Legion.
The truth is out there.
May the Force be with you.